Greetings and welcome to This is Revolution. My name is Jean Badgeland, in for Jason Myles tonight, who had a very important meeting he had to go to. He had to go to his son's recital, which I completely support and understand. So I have been drafted into hosting tonight's show. And, before we begin the show, I would like to remind you to like and subscribe. That helps TIR in the algorithm. And if you feel so inclined, consider supporting TIR on Patreon so that Jason can eat food. So we were supposed to have Ryan Grimm on tonight, but he has not yet appeared. So maybe he will appear later in the show, but never fear. I'm here with the one, the only Deep State Kuba. Hey Kuba, how is it going?
It's fine. It's good. It's been a busy week, but now that I've got Ryan Grimm bagged and zip tied in an undisclosed location, I'm ready to prepare for the holidays.
You got a contract for Hacking Jeffries to take out Ryan Grimm? You know, make sure that the Democratic Party infighting doesn't, become too public.
It's there's no shortage of willing clients when it comes to begging Ryan Grimm.
Yeah, Ryan Grimm probably has a lot of people who want to zip tie him, especially Ted Cruz, because he asked Ted Cruz some difficult questions on the Hill. And Ted Cruz was definitely not ready for those difficult questions. It's quite interesting watching the difference between Ryan Grimm on the Hill, whatever you think of him, and whatever you think of the Hill's guests, compared to MSLSD and CNN, where it is just endless bootlicking. I've never seen. I mean, MSNBC is probably the worst. I listen to it to make myself angry. But it is truly terrible news. So the topic we wanted to talk about two things with Ryan Grimm today. Firstly, we wanted to talk about the coverage of the Israeli war on the Palestinians, and segue into his new book, which it's kind of the second part to his second book, because he has another book about drugs. But he has a book called We Have the People, which is about the squad and things like that. And then he has this new book narrating the history of the squad. He is very much kind of the chronicler, I would say, of the what would you call it? The progressive left.
Sure, progressive left, whatever. But what does he say about drugs?
What does he say about it? I don't know. His first book is called Your Country is on Drugs or something like that, which is probably true because everybody seems to be on drugs these days, whether it's uppers, downers, boner drugs, deboner drugs.
They're living through chemistry.
Everything. It's the magic of chemistry, the magic of learning. There's always jobs for pharmacists out there. So, if you are considering doing a useful degree, consider pharmacy, because that's a growth area if you want to get in on that gravy train.
The one of the luxury surf positions that's going to be cracked wide open once you have fully blown techno-feudalism in California is drug sommelier.
Oh yeah, the drugs sommelier. Yeah, that's kind of really just the kind of poison taster for rich people. It's like, test my drugs out for me first, and then we'll see if I'll take it.
No, there's definitely going to be two tiers for that role. One is just to see if this is poisoned, right? Like if Bezos finally decided to go get you. And the other is the one that curates your experience, right? Like first take a couple of these, then take a puff of this, then listen to some music, maybe some fish, maybe go to the show in the Sphere for U2, and then end the night with a couple of these.
Yeah, I mean that could be an exciting job, and you know the shops are all going to look like Apple stores as well, and they're going to have
Oh,
like,
without a doubt.
and the fentanyl is going to be packed in like very classy packing as well.
They're going to try to make everything that's organic look as technological as possible, and everything that comes from a laboratory, they're going to dress it up like it's salad.
100%. And well,
Got to justify your markup.
we have to justify a market. Well, our good friend Ryan Grimm is here, and so I am excited to have him on today to talk about the press coverage on Israel-Palestine and his exciting new book, which, you know, I've been excited to bring out all these wonderful puns for Ryan. We can call his books The Grimm's Tales, or we can call his collection of books The Grimoires, which I thought was a good one. So let's bring our guest on tonight, the one, the only, master of the grimoire, Ryan Grimm. Welcome to TIR.
Good to be here, guys.
Well, it's a real pleasure.
Sorry to be late. I had this in my calendar as 9 a.m. and then something else came up at 9 a.m. and I was like, oh, I guess that's what that thing was.
No, that happens to me all the time.
Apologies.
No.
Well, that's okay. We're not Republicans. We're not punctual.
We're not punctual.
Well,
we don't believe in time. Time is a conservative conspiracy designed to make us all work in the factories.
And I might have to jump away for a little bit to finish putting my kids to bed. How long do you guys plan on going?
We'll be vamping for a while, so we're happy if you.
Cool. So we can chat as long as I can, and then put them to bed, and then come back. And
why don't we start with the coverage of Palestine, Israel, and when it gets too hot for you, you've got a built-in.
Be like, wow, got to roll.
So well, just before you came on, we were talking about your interview with Ted Cruz, which I think is a good place to start with that coverage, because what was really striking about that interview was not so much that what Ted Cruz said, was that it seemed that he was completely unable to think on his feet and defend his position. He just kept going back to talking points, and that, I think, tells us less about Ted Cruz and more about the media ecosystem that he is used to operating in. What's your feeling about the way that the media is covering this war, especially when it's talking to American politicians and asking them questions?
Yeah, that was an interesting moment, because you're right. Like, Ted Cruz is a product of our nation's best universities. I think Harvard and Yale or whatever, all the way through. He's an intelligent guy, well-read, has a staff of people who keep him briefed on things. And it was my sense, and I'm curious if it was your sense too, that when I told him that Likud's platform includes the phrase, an approximation of from the river to the sea, there will only be Israeli sovereignty, he was hearing that for the first time, it felt like, which is like on the left, that's kind of, everybody just kind of knows that. Like that's a thing people, you don't even have to be like deeply versed in the conversation to like have that as one of the facts that's like just at your disposal. And so it was a window into this kind of how divorced some of the ecosystems are. And then from there he just pivoted back to, well, I saw the video yesterday of 47 minutes of atrocities, and goes from there, which was his sign of like, I'm tapping out, like I don't have a response to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was my impression too, that it was like it came as a kind of shock to him that this was something that was in Likud's platform in the past, and obviously
and that they've been saying this week on the record. And not just that, we've this is you go back to revisionist Zionism, you go back to Menachem Begin, all these people, this was their objective, right?
To have like full sovereignty. And what I thought striking, and I wonder what you think about this, Ryan, that even when you disagree with another side's position, you usually try to know that position so that you can come up with the talking points.
And that's especially true of Ted Cruz is a giant debate guy.
Right. Debate me, bro. Yeah.
Exactly. That's his best practice.
Yeah. So why do you think they are so ignorant of let's say, the other side of the argument? Even if they're cynically trying to learn it in order to debunk points.
I think it's because Israel-Palestine is different. Like, I think Ted Cruz is going to be pretty well versed on the other side's arguments in pretty much every other topic, because in pretty much every other topic, there are going to be times where he's in a confrontational interview. He considers the New York Times and CNN and these others to be, the left.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's engaging with the left all the time. And so if he's talking about unions or he's talking about anything else in the political world, he's going to be ready for like what the left is going to throw at him. But on CNN or in the New York Times or anywhere else, like, nobody's going to actually bring any arguments that are going to come anywhere near questioning whether or not Likud's platform is like legitimate or not, or going anywhere near a place that like suggests you're standing up for Palestinian rights. Or so I think he's just never gonna he's really never gonna confront just very basic standard arguments, because there's such a concern in the media that if you make those basic arguments, that it's gonna come off like you're some unhinged, Hamas supporting lunatic.
Mm.
And so, because there's so much, there's the gap between the reality on the ground over in Israel-Palestine and what people understand about it here is so great that when you talk about the reality, you sound crazy. Like when Jamal Bowman was on MSNBC or CNN or wherever he was, and he's like, I was stopped at a checkpoint that I couldn't go past because I wasn't Jewish, and I'm a member of Congress who's voting to fund the security in this area, and I can't go down these streets. He sounds crazy. And Richie Torres, who's been on AIPAC trips and has been lied to on those trips, is like, you're crazy, you're a liar. And then other people had to come in and be like, yeah, actually, so let's back off of this one because he's actually not lying. But to a regular American, decent human being who's watching it, they're like, that's not possible. Like, that doesn't stand.
And picking up on that, there's certainly a bubble. It includes the legacy media and a lot of upper middle class, respectable people across the country that have exactly that mentality, that Likud is a normal party, that Israel is a normal country, that they wouldn't do anything like having Israeli-only roads, Jewish-only roads in the occupied territories. That just wouldn't happen. And, you can trust them when they give you assurances. You can believe what they say. And I think that for the older generation, especially those that came out of kind of 60s era universities, there's a romanticized version of Israel that exists basically only in that imagination. But there it's completely dominant, and no one likes having it challenged. At best, you'll hear, well, Netanyahu isn't Israel and Netanyahu's ruined everything. Mm-hmm. But you certainly won't countenance the idea. In fact, for many of these people, I'd say it's easier to accept that the United States commits war crimes than that Israel does.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ted Cruz actually said that.
He said that. I heard from a bunch of service members deeply offended by that. So for people who didn't watch that, I don't know if you played it or not. Yeah, Ted Cruz said, Israel, more than any other country in the world, including ours, takes more precautions to protect against civilian lives. I heard from so many service members. I have open DMs, so I get a lot of trolls and trash, but I also get a lot of great messages from actual real people. They were saying, I watched this interview, I'm like, this is infuriating. Like, one guy was like, I served in Iraq. I don't know how many times we had like a high value target, like in a building, and there was a possibility that there was a civilian with them, and the strike was called off. And the U.S. killed hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq, and they were more careful than Israel is being now. And so, so the idea that that Israel is more careful when they are saying on the record, or in blind quotes to 972 and others, that look, hey, this is a pretty good ratio we've got going here. One Hamas to 2 civilians, if that's even correct, or if a 3-year-old dies in an airstrike, it's because somebody made a decision that 3-year-old was needed to die as a part of this airstrike. Like, that's not how the U.S. does it. And the U.S. commits war crimes. U.S. We can go on and on about that, but to compare, like, the comparison is just wrong. It's wild.
I mean,
for an American senator to say that,
and a conservative, pro America rah 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 senator to say it too is truly striking. I mean, I think it says something, I think, more about liberalism in general in America, or at least establishment liberalism, is that if Ted Cruz is used to debating the left, and his conception of the left is establishment liberals,
right,
whether in the Congress or in the legacy media, there's not really much disagreement on the fundamentals of the Israel-Palestine question. Now, obviously, in recent years, especially largely because of Bibi Netanyahu's interventions into the American political process and his clear preference for the Republican Party, there is disquiet amongst Democrats about Bibi Netanyahu. You have figures like, Friedman, blaming a lot of this on Bibi Netanyahu as well. But fundamentally, the disagreement over Netanyahu is one of musical chairs at the top level, and not about anything fundamental to the to the actual issue at hand. So, with that kind of in mind, how do you see the media more generally, let's just say the legacy media more generally, handling this crisis? Because it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, that certainly you're getting a lot of pro-Israeli stuff on the legacy media, but there is beginning to be, some voices on legacy media who are a bit more critical about Israel-Palestine. You have Ali Velshi, who's been on this case for a while. There's the whole Mehdi Hassan issue, and I know you tweeted about Mehdi Hassan losing his position. And my question is, like, maybe he's been kicked out because he's too forthright on Israel-Palestine, but maybe it's just the audience doesn't want to listen to it,
right,
because he's got them, and he's getting low ratings because he's telling people things that, that they're happy to have Mehdi Hassan go after a Republican, but this is a very sensitive issue.
And you had, Clarissa Ward of CNN, go to a medical facility in Gaza recently, and she just aired the segment. It's a very, very good segment. It's great reporting. Hopefully it breaks through. You've also had, over the last 10 years, an enormous number of kind of Arab Americans hired. Not enormous is overstating it, but a non-trivial unprecedented number of Arab Americans have come into newsrooms around the country, and I think that they're making their voices heard in those newsrooms. It's not that because they're more likely to have some, at least several degrees, connection to somebody who knows something about this situation, whereas a lot of American journalists just don't. Like, they're not.
Right.
They're just not.
And how much do you think might also be generational?
I mean, and I think some of it is also generational in the sense that there's just so much more willingness and ability to talk about it openly with younger people, and part of that is actual diversity, like actual contact with Arab Americans who have experience in the region, even if it's not in Palestine, who can talk openly about it.
I mean, Justin Amash lost family. He was a congressman, and there was someone else quite well known, and I forget who it was, who also directly lost family as part of this conflict. Yeah. Because, I mean, really, just to put it in scale, we're talking about, nearly, 20,000 people dead so far in this conflict.
Out of a small population.
out of
The
a
Right.
population.
It's like, yeah, 1 out of 100 or something. Was it 1 out of, is that 1 out of 1,000 or is that 1 out of 100? Whatever it is, it's
it's
enormous.
approaching 1 out of 100.
Yeah.
This might crack 1% in terms
Right.
of
Right. And
fatalities.
we're just getting started. I'm
Yes.
worried.
Yeah, I mean this is definitely what it looks like. Do you think part of the reason for this like growing schizophrenia, at least in the media, whereas like I'll listen to MSNBC, to angry myself up every day, and you'll have Joe Scarborough and Mika in the morning, doing the sexy talk, and then have some kind of you know like very pro-Israeli position. Then you'll have interviews through the day which are a little more subtle, in terms of who they're interviewing, hostages, people whose family are hostages. I mean, they had somebody, just a random student, who was American, who happened to be in Israel during the attack. Obviously, one of the producers' kids or something came on. You'll have that, but then you'll have just interspersed in this, just a kind of a quick flash of a vision of the absolute barbarism that has been visited upon Gaza. Do you think it's becoming a kind of unsustainable lie?
Yes.
As
Yeah.
a
Yes. I think that is part of it. Like this is something that we haven't seen before. Like the 2021 Gaza war was brutal. It was deadly. But it was nothing compared to this. You had this New York Times piece by like 5 or 6 heads of the relief organizations that work, with not, in war torn areas after earthquakes, after tsunamis, and they said, we've been everywhere around the world, Sudan, to Indonesia, to Gaza and on, and we've never seen anything like this. And so it's and also as people are getting to know like actual journalists through TikTok and through Instagram, in a kind of, hey guys, like here's what's going on today kind of way, where they're building a parasocial relationship with their audience, and then watching them get killed in front of them
Mhm.
makes it so that you can't have the mainstream media just telling you what they might prefer to and have that just land. It's just not going to.
So do you think, I mean, there's a lot of talk in the media about TikTok and this malevolent influence of TikTok. It's obviously, it's presented in a very sinister way when you hear it on the media that these kids are all getting radicalized by TikTok or whatever. But do you think there's actually something to that then? You think
Yeah, I mean, it's, well, any Chinese social media app, like I'm skeptical of it, but B, it keeps reminding me of the way that the dictators in the Middle East were talking about Twitter and Facebook in
Mhm.
2010, 2011 during the Arab Spring. Like they were complaining that Facebook and Twitter were opening up, and and it was, to them it was malevolent, like that this was a CIA plot or some
literal
CIA.
InfoWars.
Right. Some CIA sponsored NGOs, and separate from that, we could understand. No, like WikiLeaks dropped a bunch of stuff. People are pissed off. Like the bread prices are through the roof, and now people can communicate openly and connect with each other and organize. And that's what you're upset about. Like it's not an actual like CIA malevolent plot. But yes, they were correct that social media was destabilizing to those dictatorial regimes. And so I think they are correct that
Well,
Instagram, TikTok, and other like platforms that are allowing the faces and voices of people who are in Gaza to, in real time, to get out to the world are destabilizing the kind of like control that we used to have over the narrative.
and arguably, if you have any kind of social media platform that isn't actively curated, tweaked, censored, if you have a society which has deep rooted problems, obvious injustice, it's going to serve as a destabilizing force.
Yeah, I mean, look at the printing press.
Yeah, I
Yes,
mean, communication.
when the Catholic Church is like, this is all the printing press's fault. It's like, yeah, that's true. You're
Yeah,
not wrong, but you also were a sclerotic, like dictatorial regime that had it coming.
And similarly, TikTok wouldn't have the content, wouldn't be able to do what it does, just like the alleged Russian interference on Facebook, social media, were there not serious social pressures there to tap into.
Right, it's happening in Gaza for a reason.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, people often overemphasize technology as a cause of a particular process rather than an accelerant for an existing tendency. So do you think are we on the verge of a kind of transformation in the American attitude towards the Israel-Palestine conflict, or is this like a breaking point, a pivotal moment? This particular conflict.
I think it might be in the wake of this, when the dust has settled and the body count is tabulated, and people look back on this. I think you're going to see isolation of Israel in a way that they haven't seen before. But the U.S. has shown itself willing to be tight allies with Saudi Arabia. So like the whole only democracy in the Middle East doesn't mean that we won't be your ally if you're not a democracy in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia being a great example. So if it's still in the U.S. interest, it's not doesn't mean that we're going to walk away because of any level of human rights abuses. The UAE and Saudi Arabia have killed how many people in Yemen over the last 7 years? But certainly you're going to see, I think, global boycotts and isolation in a way that you haven't seen before, because I think they're going to move further right. Probably the Palestinian population moves to the right. And so you'll just have this vicious cycle of something that nobody is going to want to countenance.
How do you think the coverage of the Ukraine war has, impacted people's attitudes towards the Israel-Palestine conflict? Because, the Ukraine war seems to have fallen off the radar completely in news coverage.
Mm-hmm.
But, we had a good, a year and a bit of pro-Ukrainian slant in the media. And, it becomes very difficult to square, well, why are you supporting this people who are getting oppressed, but not these other people who are getting oppressed? Do you think the this is a genocide on the Ukrainian people that's taking place, et cetera, et cetera? And then people see what's happening in Israel-Palestine, and wait, why are we on the Israeli side in this conflict? I think many Americans have a kind of not all, but many Americans, I think, like to root for the underdog.
Mm-hmm. Everybody does. Yeah, I think it felt good, even for the foreign policy blob here in D.C., when Russia invaded, to say, finally, we're not the aggressor. Okay, you can get somebody making the argument about how there were provocations, etc. But on the surface level, this guy and Putin invaded this country, and that's wrong.
Yeah, it was old-timey clarity.
It was, and they were loving the clarity of it, and to just torch that so quickly in such a fantastic fashion is quite remarkable. And I think that, yeah, you kind of accustomed people to say this is the way that a just war. This is a just war. They were invaded, and certainly you had a taste of that in the beginning with Hamas's absolutely vicious attack, where Israel had moved all of its troops up to the West Bank, and so after they break through the first lines of defense, they're just massacring civilians at the whether at the music festival in kibbutzim. And so it starts out feeling clear, but then within days you've got images of children and women and the elderly who have absolutely nothing to do with the horrors of October 7th, just getting blown to pieces. And very quickly it's gone. That moral leverage they had.
especially since there's no practical resistance that Hamas can put up. The combat is overwhelmingly one-sided. A lot of it takes place with bombing, drones, that technology that keeps Israeli soldiers safe and at a distance. It's almost dystopian, the asymmetry of it. Even and I think that may actually have something to do with the generational interpretations of the conflict too. The If you're primed with like a 1960s sort of high modernist brain, you see a civilized country, an organized nation state, fighting, let's call them natives, right? Like maybe you like them, maybe you don't, but it's a disorganized, more basic society, pre-modern. But this actually feels dystopian. The people being stomped can't be dismissed as primitives, right? Like, you know them too well. They watch the same TV shows as you. It's easy to find Palestinians that you can identify with. It's easy to find famous Palestinians that have a global impact. While the Israelis, rather than looking accomplished, look downright dystopian. That this is actually a taste of a technological boot.
Yep. No, I think that's right.
I mean, do you think?
Well, let me stop you there and go put my kids to bed, and then I'll be back at you. How's that sound?
That sounds good. We'll see you in a moment.
All right.
We found Ryan's line. It's Israel is a dystopia.
That's pretty dystopian. All right. I'll see you guys soon.
Excellent.
So yeah, well, on that point, I mean, I wonder, and I don't know what you think about this, Kuba, but part of the reason that the Israelis, are losing in the court of public opinion, it's not just obviously because they're doing horrendous things, but also the PR machine seems to be going off the rails. There seems to have been a real deterioration in the quality of the people who the Israelis are putting out to talk about this issue, because they just come, when you listen to American politicians, and the American politicians are, basically saying, well, the Israelis wouldn't do this and they wouldn't do that. And then the Israeli politicians are saying, yeah, we're doing it. We're doing these things. We're
You mean tomorrow's plan?
Yeah, tomorrow's plan. It's just very open. And it, strikes me, if we look at Israel comparatively, we see the decline of quote unquote liberal Zionism and the rise of this kind of new right Zionism. And Likud is, the moderates in the coalition government that they have. You have these, super hardcore secular parties, often with, often supported by Mizrahi Jewish people who are, people go, oh, why don't the Israelis?
The Hamas party, right?
Yeah, why don't they go back to Brooklyn and things like that? And yes, there's a lot of Israelis of European origin, but a significant number of Middle Eastern origin, and they don't have a country to go back to, and B, they're like, okay, we're going to play this like ethnic war game, this sectarianism. We're going to play it.
I mean, the origin of that community in Israel is largely because they experienced the other side of the equation in the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah, I mean, you have obviously there's, the Israeli intelligence has been implicated in certain attacks designed to intimidate Jewish people in Middle Eastern countries and get them to emigrate to Israel. But also,
again,
but it wasn't a whole psyop. It wasn't a psyop. In all these
at best.
Yeah, all these and a lot of these Middle Eastern countries passed laws seizing Jewish properties and things.
Yeah, I mean, we know what Saddam Hussein had to say on the subject. Those records exist.
So, you have this community which is like do or die as well, and they don't care about the kind of liberal sensibilities. They're not translating or what is it? I think performing Westernness to.
Well, yeah, I mean in some ways, the Ashkenazi Jewish settlers of the immediate post-war period. And I don't want to make too big an issue of this, because I think this is just diplomacy, right? This is playing the cards you have. But they were very effective in tapping into Western feelings of disgust, and especially self-disgust over the Holocaust, which then gave it gave a certain coloration to the Western view of Israel. But the Mizrahi experience is quite different, right? Like, rather than arriving in Israel and establishing yourself as kind of a quasi act of penance by the international community, you got away yourself, and not from the monsters of history, and not thanks to the good graces of the international community, but you were subject to force, and you survived thanks to Israeli strength.
And more than that, the whole Nakba was just swept under the carpet for a long time, and the conflict was portrayed as the Arab-Israeli conflict, where the Israelis, at least on a surface level, could plausibly present themselves as being the underdog, that they're this kind of plucky democracy in the heart of the Middle East.
That's the narrative that I was taught.
Yeah, and that they're fighting the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Jordanians, the Iraqis. This David and Goliath story, but that story, it was always a story, of course.
I mean, they all are.
They all are, but B, it's just not plausible anymore. It's not become plausible. The Israelis had two huge military victories in the 60s and the 70s. They made peace with the Egyptians in 79. They basically have peace with the Jordanians. And there was opposition from Iraq and Syria, but, look at where Iraq and Syria are now. And so, one of the things I always said about the Abraham Accords was that, in a certain sense, it was a positive thing, in the sense that it was clarifying, in that it showed that, these countries, they're happy to do business with Israel. They may mobilize anti-Semitism internally for internal consumption. They may cry tears for the Israelis, for the Palestinians. But in practical terms, the Israel-Palestine conflict's primary role is to internalize, is to have this kind of nationalist, justify this national intelligence state. You see this, still with countries like Turkey, which are making a big deal about being pro-Palestinian. But of course, Turkey could stop this war tomorrow if they shut the oil pipelines from Azerbaijan down, right? But obviously, they're not going to do that. They're not going to stop Israeli, transferring goods to Israel. They're not going to embargo Israel. So, with so many of these powers kind of like having a détente with Israel, it's clarified what this conflict is actually about. Which is, because the Israelis will always say, there's, whenever you talk about the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, they'll be going, well, hundreds of thousands of Jews were ethnically cleansed from the Middle East. Yeah, but Palestinians weren't doing that ethnic cleansing. Those were Iraqis, those were, Egyptians, those were other nations. So by, talking about the Arabs as this kind of unified bloc, it became this way for the Israelis to present themselves as this plucky power on the defensive, defending its small slither of territory. They will say, there's only one Jewish state and there's 22 Arab states. Like, what is all that about? Completely a kind of misdirection. It's a very clever and intuitive kind of sleight of hand, but one that breaks down once you actually get into the details of what we're talking about. Because there's never been a unified Arab nation or nationality. There's sympathy, there is pan-Arabism, but since the formation of the nation state in the Middle East, you have this kind of territorial nationalism. The Iraqis and the Syrians and all these other groups, they're not the same.
Well, also, nationalism aside, the institutions of state administration, the security apparatus, they're all tied to these territorial models, and they're staffed locally. So that alone is going to complicate any attempt to raise this to a, Arab stick Israel type situation. And I think that I also don't want to, I want to make it clear that this is, that Israel has legitimate security concerns, right? Like the Hamas did kill a bunch of people in really horrific ways, and imagine being worried that that could happen again on a larger scale. It's at different points, right? Like it could have lost some of the wars that it fought. Arguably, I think do the Egyptians claim the Yom Kippur War as a win?
Well, it was kind of a win because they forced the Israelis to the negotiating table. I mean, in terms of the military balance of power, it's always really been in favor. Even in 48, the military balance of power was, very much in favor of the Israelis. And, if we look forward to today, I mean, since I can remember, my image of Israel-Palestine is not the Israelis defending from a sneak attack from the Egyptians. It's like an Israeli boot stomping on a Palestinian face forever and ever and ever. And the problem that the Israelis have is like the very nature of their state and their political elite is that they have these legitimate concerns, but these legitimate, quote unquote, security concerns. But those security concerns emerge out of the fact that the Israeli state is unable to resolve this kind of contradiction between trying to be a liberal democracy and trying to be a Jewish state. And so
we're seeing them resolve it. And I think that we should actually take a moment of silence to mourn the passing of an actual Israeli liberal society, which existed, right, up until relatively recently. But I think that there's been some major changes in the social basis of Israeli politics that mean that it's getting resolved, that contradiction in favor of Zionist nationalism. And I think partly what we have, just like in the United States on a smaller scale, you have a sorting. Liberal Israeli Jews who want to emigrate have had their pick of countries of settlement. Canada, the United States, Australia, anywhere in Europe. It wasn't hard to study abroad. It wasn't hard to stay abroad. And there were Israeli communities and Jewish communities that were very happy to take you in. And if you're thinking about the most cosmopolitan and peace-oriented segments of the Israeli population, especially young people, maybe ones that are avoiding service in the IDF, or maybe ones that were disgusted by what they saw, they go abroad, they stay abroad, and they're no longer a factor. And you instead have the entrenchment of the people who stay behind, who have the opportunity to live their life in Montreal or, try to form a band in Milan. Instead, they say no and dedicate themselves to a particular kind of nation building project. And every year they are numerically stronger because of the opportunity for exit.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. The demographics in Israel are changing significantly and moving, further and further to the right. I mean, when Israel was founded, that Israel was going to be, for Jewish people, a democracy with civil liberties was essential to that political project. It couldn't be a kind of dictatorship.
It couldn't be.
because otherwise, why would people emigrate there, right? You know, people would not want to move, you know, to Israel or do Aliyah to Israel if it was like, you know, Ba'athist Iraq, but for Jewish people. But slowly, you know, that is disintegrating as the population that's moved there has entrenched 2 or 3 generations in now. You have demographic shifts, and then you have the rise of, you know, the non-European Jewish populations in Israel to political prominence. Not to say that the quote unquote European Jews are better, but you know, they had a kind of different political orientation, whereas you have you know, Mizrahi Jews and you know, other Jews who don't have the opportunity to emigrate ever, increasingly dominating this project. And you know, that instability between this idea of a Jewish state and a democracy, you know, that is getting resolved, like you said, in favor of the right-wing solution, which is it's going to turn it into an even more brutal ethno state. And you know, this campaign, just the level of political violence that we're seeing in this campaign is just unbelievable. And you know, people will make apologetics for it, like it's urban warfare, it's, you know, it's a response to the terrorist attack. But you know, this is precisely, you know, Hamas's attack didn't come out of the blue. History didn't begin on you know, October the 7th. You know, hundreds of Palestinians have died over the last couple of years. You know, this was bound to happen with the Israeli policy that they were pursuing. I mean, two-state solution. I mean, there's a lot of debate about like, oh, well, we should just throw out the two-state solution and things like that. But, you know, was there even really ever a chance of a two-state solution? Because a two-state solution, when you look into the details, you know, and I argue with, you know, people about this in Middle Eastern studies all the time. It's like, well, what do you mean by two states? They're like, well, the Palestinians will have their self-rule. It's like, will they have a sovereign state? Will they be able to, you know, conduct their foreign policy? Will they be able to build their military forces up, et cetera, et cetera? And they're like, no, of course not, right? And so that's not a state then, is it? That's like,
yeah, but the I think that one, it's not nothing, and two, that deal you never start with the end goal. Has to be a process of like trust building, and typically you see this in a lot of UN peacekeeping operations. Often they're frozen when there's something closer to a balance, but under conditions of routine violence, it's even more important that the aggressor feels secure because they know what they have coming. Right.
Well, the problem for the Israelis is, you know, whenever they talk about the Palestinians didn't accept a state, et cetera, you know, the trust issue is important, but all the way through the Oslo process, there was continued land appropriations, there was continued settlement, and
absolutely.
And you know, from my perspective, that's the core of the issue, right? You can't ask for forgiveness or peace, you know, for a crime that's taken place while the robbery is still in progress, right? You know, like, so the mistrust of the Palestinians for the, you know, perhaps under better condition, you know, had settlement frozen in the 90s and they started withdrawing people from the West Bank and Gaza, then you could have had this kind of gradual move towards sovereignty for the Palestinians. Not a perfect solution, but at least it wouldn't be the bloodbath it is today. But that's not what happened. And
I think that it all hinges on what the internal elite Israeli balance was between people who were willing to back down if they got the right deal, versus those who had a greater Israel Zionist project, and it was just another step, right? You always keep going in the same direction, and I feel like I can't say. I don't know Israeli politics well enough.
But I mean, in retrospect, definitely, like Oslo looks to have been a kind of trap. even if it wasn't intended as a trap, that's definitely what it ended up becoming. It became this trap because it's always portrayed like, well, the Israelis were willing to give up all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. Well, to make peace at Oslo, the Palestinians gave up a hell of a lot too. In fact, they gave up, they gave up any claim to the, to
compensation or return.
Compensation return. They basically sold the refugees down the river, and for the promise of a kind of autonomy, which may lead to sovereignty in the future. And that was already a difficult sell to the Palestinians. But then if you're trying to sell that to the Palestinians while at the same time this aggressive settlement is taking place, and then in the 2000s, the Israeli government basically just freezes this all in because they're happy with the status quo. Because I feel when Israelis talk, not all, but when a lot of Israelis talk about peace, they just don't want to be bothered by the Palestinians. And Bibi gave them that, right? He gave them that with the mowing lawn, and it worked. And it worked until it didn't. But it did work for a long time. And you have a new generation in Israel that is grown up, that is far more nationalistic and right-wing. I often think of Israel as kind of very comparable to Turkey in that sense, whereas, the tendency is that, the younger generation tends to be more liberal and less nationalistic and stuff like that. In countries like Turkey and Israel, you're seeing like the opposite is taking place. People are kind of just defaulting to a kind of secularized sectarianism. You do have your religious fundamentalists, obviously, in Israel, but you have the metamorphosis of kind of like what was that kind of liberal, even if you think it was a facade, but that liberal idea is like, we want to live in peace with the Arabs.
Yeah, a kind of modernist nationalism.
That's just totally given away. It's like, no, we're going to wipe them out, right? Like the mask has fallen off. Maybe they always felt that all the time. Maybe they didn't. First Intifada.
Well, I would argue that millions of those that felt differently just left.
I mean, like the first Intifada, when it hit, one of the reasons Rabin was able to go to Oslo in the first place was because, a segment of Israeli society was like, maybe this is not a sustainable political project. Maybe we have to do something about this and make peace with the Palestinians so we can get on with our lives. But you don't see that response to this attack that's taken place.
Yeah.
You just see this is just the excuse that the Israelis were looking for to unleash hell. And we see it. We've been seeing it all year in the West Bank, right? And everything is still going on in the West Bank. It really beggars belief. And, to return to the kind of issue with the media, I just think, it's like, it's a case of don't believe your lying eyes, right? It's like people are just like, just the facts, the things the Israeli government says, the pictures that are coming out of Israeli settlers, chopping down trees and attacking Palestinians and things like that. It's just becoming unsustainable. The image of the Arab as a kind of irrational barbarian is just collapsing in front of our eyes. It's just not sustainable when you're saying, well, who is doing the barbarism? Yeah, we know that Hamas did these terrible things, but look at the grand scheme of things. Like, what do people expect was going to happen if you put people in escape from New York-like conditions for 16 years? 16 years. People are going to try and do a prison break, and people are going to go ham when they get out of that prison break. It's like a force of nature. It's like,
yeah, the amount of trauma, the amount of rage that's pent up in the Palestinian population, especially in Gaza, right? They would have to be inhuman to fight in the kind of way that actually Israel says it fights, in terms of scrupulous protection of civilians, that kind of thing.
This is a fact that's known to.
Let's get to the super chats.
We will get to the super chats, but I want to make one more point. The first thing is like the nature of violence between those with the guns and the power and those who don't have the guns with the power is going to look different. This was I can't remember the academic, but a very famous Cold War liberal academic made the point that, often the violence of the oppressed, looks kind of like
Weapons of the week.
Weapons. It looks disgusting, whereas it's more clinical with established powers and things like that. But it's not really a moral issue, right? It's just like people will use the weapons that they have, and trying to be a humanitarian. Honestly, my perception is that often it's less about giving a damn about the people that you're oppressing, and more about kind of your own hubris and self-image, like, oh well, I'm civilized, we don't do this type of violence. But that's only because you have the luxury of not having to resort to that type of violence, because you have all those kind of things. It's not, I'm not defending anything type of violence, but it just seems like this is just an inevitability because of the nature of the political, of the conflict. I mean, Hamas was the opposition the Israelis wanted to have, right?
Yes, I think that's a great way of putting it, and I think that ties in with our first super chat, which is
from Sean. Would you care to read it, Cooper?
I will. Those of us who protested Desert Storm knew that there would be horrific consequences for the USA, even if none of us could have predicted 9/11. What will be the consequences for Gaza?
God knows what will be the consequences from this. I mean, there's so much blood being spilled. A whole generation is being brutalized. I mean, you have to remember, this is like 50% of the population are kids, right? And even if Israel, was going to go do like an operation, like Hamas does an attack, well, yes, the Israelis are going to respond. But what they're doing is like, it's like bombing a school to get the school shooter, right? It's absolutely insane, and I just don't think it's plausible anymore to pretend that the Israelis are doing the humanitarian, are trying to be humanitarian, as it were, as it's always been portrayed in the press. Like Ryan said, Ted Cruz was like, the Israelis are even better than America at doing this.
Yes.
Which I don't think is true, but it's crazy.
Well, I think that we don't know what will happen to the population of Gaza ultimately, right? There's clearly, I think that the quote was that Netanyahu wants the conflict to drag so that the population of Gaza could be thinned out, or maybe it's just thinned out and implying that no agent behind it, but also a long-standing project of the Israeli government has been to try to push third countries, especially Arab countries, but whoever really, to accept large population transfers from the occupied territories to make them more easy to administer and ultimately to settle. But so the population might be permitted to return and rebuild under some even stricter kind of embargo, even stricter border controls, limitations on imports. The situation in Gaza was already dire, horrific. So it'll be worse than that if the Gazans are allowed to return. You end up with just a shift in the population to a large number of refugee camps along the Egyptian border, while northern Gaza becomes more of a no man's land.
And this is a problem that the Israelis have, is that they might want to expel the Palestinian population, but 100% Egypt does not want to have to deal with it, and the Israelis are constrained by their alliance with Egypt. That's number one. Right? The Egyptians just can't handle an inflow of two million refugees. Secondly, Middle Eastern countries that accept Palestinian refugees will be seen as complicit in Israeli ethnic cleansing and will be delegitimized. So again, that's a kind of another non-starter. Another alternative would be, and this is what I would say, it's like, if America really cares about it, they could just say any Palestinian that wants to move to America can move to America, but they don't want to do that either. So you have a population which really has nowhere to go, right? There's nowhere for them to move. And this is not like an old-fashioned taking over one country by another country. It's not like, Israel wants to annex the Gaza Strip and then have all those 2 million people be their population.
Yeah, it's interesting subjects.
They're trying to divest from Palestinian labor. Palestinian labor helped build Israel from the ground up, but increasingly the Israelis are looking to India, to Southeast Asia, looking to extremely
the guest workers. I think one of them was from Thailand that was kidnapped. Right, Southeast Asia as well.
There were people from Africa, so they're looking for a population. It's almost, and maybe this is a bad analogy, but it's almost like they don't want to have the Native Americans. It's like you don't want to have the Native Americans on your
conscience.
No, on your sugarcane plantation, because they'll run away and they know the territory and they're like in the society. So you have these people who are you have these people who are kind of shipped in as guest workers and are like working in extremely harsh conditions, who have no political power or no investment in that society beyond trying to make money so that they can return to their family. And this is,
although that's how it started in Europe as well.
Right. So that's one super chat. We have another super chat. Here's another super chat. Israel has gone from a passive liberal genocide to a reactionary genocide.
There was a question for 25 Hong Kong dollars.
How much is 25 Hong Kong dollars?
It's one more than 24 Hong Kong dollars.
It seems that, like, Israel will not face consequences for the massacre after Myanmar, and the UN remain relevant as a peacemaker in the future. I mean, is the UN?
Oh heavens!
The UN only works when everybody wants the UN to work, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And if somebody doesn't want the UN to work, it won't work. It can do things, but it needs everybody to be on board with. So I don't think Israel will, at least in the immediate term, face any consequences for what's taking place. Their PR is taking a hit, but it seems that they still have a lock on the political establishment.
That's not quite true. Some consequences are being felt already. Don't forget that as much of an advantage as Israel has in this conflict, until a moment, it looked like total victory was within reach. Right, the normalization of ties with Saudi Arabia on the table, out in the open, and that would have really spelt the end of any kind of regional cooperation for the Palestinian cause. Right, you have Saudi Arabia accepting the Israeli position on it, and especially with a young monarch like MBS who's going to be around for 40 years. It makes a big difference. And that has become impossible. Mind you, I think it also points to another issue that I wanted to bring up, which is the cleavage between the elite level politics in the region and the mass popular political and social currents. And I don't think it's limited to the Middle East, but it's an excellent case study because the public sentiment across Arab countries is overwhelmingly supportive of Palestine. And that includes both anti-Semites and non-anti-Semites, right? From that vantage point, it looks like somebody's beating up, I don't know,
your grandma.
Yeah, like that. The guy's been, even if it started as something close to a fair fight, right? Like the guy's been down for 30 years, right? Like you can stop now, right? Don't pretend that like it isn't over. But at the elite level, there's such connection between Israelis and Saudi, Gulf Arab, you name it. Both political and economic elites across the region have done business with Israel and have found them to be a useful partner that you can play with, right? Like they'll
And it seems like
hold up their end of the deal.
the Israelis got a little bit high on their own supply as well, believing that making these openings with Arab dictators meant something more than it was. And I think we saw this in the World Cup when you had these Israeli reporters going around going, hey, we're friends now. And people are just telling to F off, like, long live Palestine, et cetera, et cetera. The Israelis, I think, definitely miscalculated on how this would play out in the rest of the Middle East, that people were sick of the Palestinians. And so, like, they'd be fine to throw them under the bus. So I see that point. But I would come back and say, like, one of the biggest strengths that Israel has is that they have good relations with everybody, right? China's technology transfer, the transfer of technology between the United States and China to takes place a lot of it through Israel, right?
Yeah, they're shady Switzerland.
Yeah, like they operate. They have channels open with Russia. The Israelis, the Israeli military establishment has long wanted to make sure that it has some kind of independence from the United States, and they're navigating the shift towards a more multipolar world by making good relations with all the big players, because they know the big players matter. So Saudi Arabia is a big player, but China is an even bigger player, right? Russia is a big player. Israel was not all rah-rah about the Ukraine war. There was criticism. The Ukrainians were complaining that the Israelis weren't giving them the Iron Dome, et cetera, at the beginning of the war. So the Israelis have also played a very kind of a top-level diplomacy game that has kind of secured their position. The question obviously remains, though, is about public sentiment. Now, if we look at the Arab world and the Islamic world more generally, and perhaps throw in Latin America there, in general, I think, the public opinion in those parts of the world have always been pro-Palestinian, right? But what's different?
Look at Ireland.
Huh?
Look at Ireland.
Yeah, look at Ireland. Look at Ireland, exactly.
To pick an exotic case.
Exotic Ireland. But what is striking is that in the West now, as Ryan was saying earlier, when you talked about the realities on the ground in Palestine, people would think you're nuts, right? When you say apartheid, people are like, how dare you say apartheid? And it's like, well, what other term would you like to use? Rabbinic Rhodesia, that's my preferred term. But this is the kind of veil is falling down. It does definitely feel this time, and like, this is anecdotal. I was talking to an Arab shopkeeper here in Springfield, and he was saying he's never seen it like this. That people were, so supportive of Palestine, and I think the colliery of this is going to be, fuel to the fire of we have to combat misinformation. Or TikTok's giving misinformation about Palestine, which is really quite funny because, obviously the Hamas attack was pretty bad, right? You don't need to embellish it, but like some of the embellishments that are taking place, have proved to be baseless or not confirmed. The whole 40 beheaded babies thing, which was extremely cynically deployed because it's a kind of dehumanizing thing, right? It's like, these guys beheaded the babies. And it's like, well, what they did with
there's I have a feeling that what's happening is that the Israeli public relations establishment realizes that they're in a different position, that what worked in the past is no longer working, and they're just trying harder and harder to sell it.
They don't have a good product, but on
the
that
problem, No, I'm on the one hand, right, the footage of the attacks, the Hamas attacks, that's an excellent product to get sympathy for what happened to your people. The problem is they can't prevent people from also seeing what's going on in Gaza on a daily basis
Yep, that's true.
to many more people.
And on that point, Ryan is back because we're talking about PR and we're talking about Israeli public affairs. Welcome back, Ryan. I hope your kids are safe and sound asleep because I know how long it takes. So the question I want to have is I want to kind of pivot to talking about your book. And you have this new exciting book, Ryan, which I'm going to put up on the screen for people to see. It is, where is it? Here it is. Ooh, it is The Squad, AOC and the Hope of a Political Revolution, which, Ryan, would you call this a sequel to We Have the People? Would that be a good description of it? Oh, you're quiet. I can't hear you at the moment. If you just check your, if you check the little cog on the thing just to make sure your microphone is working. I will just send. Oh, Kuba, vamp for a second while I help Ryan out.
Well, I think that the point that I was making about elite versus popular politics doesn't just apply to the Middle East and the position of Israel, but I was looking forward to running that by Ryan, seeing it as a potential lens to understand American politics, that there is an elite consensus, which
that good
is
yes.
Okay, I'm done. We've got the headliners back on.
The headliners back on. Yeah. So Kuba was go ahead with your question, Kuba.
So, I see in your book you really spelled out the difference between party establishment within the Democratic Party, which was insular, incumbent, very elite, and politically timid to moderate to cynical. And the protagonists of your book, people like AOC, come from a different world. They're often much younger, much more diverse, different life experiences. First of all, like, one question is, do you think that that's more representative of what contemporary America looks like, or the most dynamic parts of America, compared to the elite country club, the Pelosi to Buttigieg spectrum?
Yeah, sure. I mean, population wise, for sure. It's the Pelosi Buttigieg. That's, I mean, somebody can check the census, but that's maybe 20% of the population. So yeah, like the numbers are in a multiracial working and middle class. Like that's where you're going to get 70%, 80% of the population, and then you're going to have sympathizers in the in the 20 in that 20% of like college educated upper middle class, because so many of those people feel, and rightly so, feel pretty precarious, like are a downsizing away themselves from like downward mobility.
So no shortage of aspirants in the 80%, right?
And absolutely, yes, yeah.
It doesn't. I think the precarity is extremely important, because people will look at the kind of salaries people are pulling down and things like that and go like, well, the economy seems fine. People seem to have jobs and stuff like that with good salaries. But the point is, like, even if you are, because there's so much economic uncertainty, even if you are comfortable or relatively wealthy, you feel the stress, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you can't relax.
I think the price swings and the wild kind of stock market swings from 2020 through 2023. You had that crash where all the senators made a whole bunch of money by selling right before the crash because they knew the crash was coming. and then wild swings, and then you see prices jumping up, and then you see interest rates, which had been stable for like 20 years, mortgage rates jumping up to 7-8%. And that, even though you have under 4% unemployment, which is wonderful, and which is driving labor militancy in a way that can like transform the whole political economy, all of that change, I think, fuels people's sense of precarity, especially because a lot of people that are in the workforce now lived through the Great Recession and saw that happen, and they saw also, like, if you were in your 40s or 50s when the Great Recession hit and the Great Financial Crisis hit, and there was there, for a lot of those people, they just had to hold their breath till they turned 62 and could get reduced Social Security benefits because of age discrimination in the workplace. Like, going from things being great in 2007, like you're humming 40s, early 50s, headed to, you're going to do another 15, 20 years in the workforce, and then you're going to retire down in Florida and play golf. And then boom, next thing you know, like you cannot get an job interview because there's so few jobs, and they're not hiring anybody that's over 50 for those jobs.
So you're stuck at Walmart greeters.
Yeah, every time and that, like, after 20 years or 25 years of dignified white collar work, like it's a punch in the face that is going to create like either a reactionary or a socialist mind. It's going to look for some vehicle to let out that resentment from that downward mobility.
One of the things I was curious about in your book, and I've read your first part of the Squad Saga. I think you should think of a good name for this series of books, because I'm sure there'll be more in the future. But
it's a trilogy.
The trilogy, yeah, it has to at least be a trilogy. But the first volume was very hopeful. This one doesn't seem so hopeful, because it seems that you're chronicling the counteroffensive in many ways, and the Democratic Party establishment was clearly caught off guard, in the mid 2010s, and you had some enterprising people, like my boy Zach Exley, local Springfield guy. He's I don't know if he's in Springfield right now, but he lives out here in Springfield, has a good pulse on the country. His friends Corbin and Trent and things like that. People who were kind of hooked up in the establishment, but were very much of this like new technology people, kind of taking the lead, wealthy people, successful people, but who were kind of outside of the system, and they're kind of bringing more.
The revolution of the donors.
The revolution of the donors, yeah. And so you have this kind of Democratic Party that's called flat-footed. But in this second volume, which I have not read all of, Jason sent me the book late, so I had to cram like an undergraduate. But it seems you're focusing here on like how this kind of big money is now being deployed. And obviously one of the examples you talk about is AIPAC, which is a good intersection between what we were talking about before you put your kids to bed and what we're talking about now. So, perhaps could you like talk a little bit about like, the AIPAC case, and what is it illustrative more about this counteroffensive that's taking place?
Yeah, I think I got to think of the title of the trilogy, because I actually thought about titling this one "They've Got Money," with the first one, "We've Got People," which came from a line in AOC's stump speech and her big viral ad, where she said, this is a race between people and money. They've got money, but we've got people. And so that's where the first title came from. But the second one, the reaction is they've got money, and I think flat-footed is well said. Like that oftentimes happens to sclerotic establishments, that they get caught off guard by projects or movements that they should be able to suppress, but because they're complacent, they don't see it coming, and they get knocked for a loop. So they
I
got
mean, you're actually kind of describing the election of Donald Trump as well as the rise of AOC.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And probably most, overthrows of monarchs and dictators around the world, that they probably should have beaten whoever it was that beat them. But they made mistakes along the way. Like usually most successful revolutions benefit from significant mistakes at the hands on the other side. And so they get hit in the face with Bernie Sanders in 2016, and then the rise of the Squad in 2018, and in January 2019, you see the creation of the organization called Democratic Majority for Israel, which was basically a spin-off out of AIPAC. A lot of AIPAC donors, a lot of AIPAC consultants. The Mark Mellman, the founder of it, was a consultant, might still be a consultant to Yair Lapid, who's the head of the Yesh Atid party in Israel. Actually became prime minister during the period of this book. I think lasted like 6 months or so, and did his own bombing of Gaza, actually, for like 2 days. I think maybe a 3-day bombing. And so they launched really, in just direct reaction to the Squad being sworn into Congress, and particularly Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib being sworn into Congress. Not that they'd necessarily even done anything yet. There was a little bit of talk about BDS during the campaign, but there were none of the controversies yet. It was just, here come 2 Muslim women, one of them Palestinian, to Congress. Like, we need to do something. And so they brought together this very well-funded operation that's stood up with a splashy profile in the New York Times. And then the first money they spent was actually that next year, or actually later that year, against Bernie Sanders in the presidential campaign. And they end up spending millions, but unsuccessfully. In a lot of cases, they lose to Jamal Bowman, who knocks off Elliot Engel, which was just a lightning bolt to the pro-Israel community in the United States. Elliot Engel, one of the most hawkish members of the House, and was the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
And that was a real scalp for the Squad, in the sense that AOC, when she won her primary, she was winning her primary with like 10,000 votes.
Right.
It was like,
yeah.
I think
11,000 and 9,000 or something.
It's
crazy.
That was a complete, just the Democratic Party establishment not doing its due diligence. I mean, I think Shahid Buttar got more votes than AOC in his primary against Nancy Pelosi than AOC did in her primary against whatever his name was, the guy she knocked up.
Right.
Engel was a real scalp. That was a real fight.
Oh, for sure. Multi-million-dollar race, and a race that, he took it for granted for a little bit, because for a long time he had 2 opponents, and to the great credit of the kind of progressive world in New York, they managed to get one of them to drop out and endorse the other one, and then it was on. And then it was like within days, he came scrambling back from his house in Maryland, went to a Black Lives Matter rally, and like with a hot mic running, begs to speak. And they're like, look, we're not going to let every politician who's coming here speak. He's like, look, if I didn't have a primary, I wouldn't be here. Okay. If I didn't have a primary, I wouldn't have to speak. And the New York One is right there recording it. They're like, did this guy just say that if he didn't have a primary, he wouldn't even be at this rally? So that played for a while. And so all the spending, couldn't undo that, plus his, Jamal Bowman's genuine charisma and genuine kind of grassroots support. Like, people just liked him, and he shocked. What really shocked AIPAC was that he won almost every like Jewish precinct, and there are a lot of Jewish precincts in the district, heavily Jewish precincts, and he won them. And that's when they're like, okay, like, we are losing control of this conversation. Like, something needs to be done. And so then the next cycle, AIPAC itself launches. DMFI continues to spend $10 million or so, but then AIPAC itself spends something $30+ million just carpet bombing Democratic primaries, making sure that critics of Israel don't make it through, and that the Squad is kept as small as it possibly can be.
I'm curious about that. How does that fit in with a kind of broad, because it seems like AIPAC in general, it's not just attacking people who are critical of Israel, but it's attacking progressives in general. Has AIPAC come to see, that Richie Torres is an outlier, as it were? There seemed to be a time where Richie Torres was going to be like the new AIPAC approved counter squad, but that really has like gone to the wall, and I'm not sure of Torres's voting record whether it's particularly progressive, but it seems that AIPAC has declared war on just progressives in general. So they're not just opposing critics of Israel, but they assume if you support X, Y, and Z policy, even if you've never said anything about Israel, we're going to carpet bomb you anyway, because if you're progressive, you're likely to be pro-Palestinian.
And also the class interests line up. Like the money that was coming into these organizations is coming from people who are, private equity executives, running hedge funds, owning baseball teams, owning gigantic store chains around the country. Like these are people who are sitting at the commanding heights and are benefiting from Republican and kind of corporate Democratic tax policies, regulatory policies. So it's certainly it's a win-win. Fetterman was an interesting case where like he was immediately under suspicion of being potentially pro-Palestinian because he was associated with Bernie and the Squad. And the original articles in the like Jewish press, Jewish Insider had a good piece on this, where like it opens saying Fetterman is known as a progressive and is associated with the Squad, which has raised a lot of concerns, in the pro-Israel community that he might be, soft on support for Israel. But then it turned out that no, like that he was not at all.
But he is it not the case that he actually had AIPAC approve his kind of statements?
DMFI, but yes.
Democratic majority.
He reached out directly and was like, let's hammer this out.
So how significant then would you say, AIPAC and Democratic majority for Israel, how significant are they as a tool in American politics to discipline progressives? Obviously, you have the old conspiracy theory, the Jews control the world, blah, blah, blah. But, obviously that's, not the case. This is there's an alliance of convenience, here between people who have, like you say, certain class interest. So, where does AIPAC stand in a kind of as a disciplining mechanism for the Democratic Party? How significant is it? What other forces are there out there that serve as a disciplining mechanism for Democrats? Because, I see it here in Missouri where where Cory Bush, was, AIPAC gave a little bit of money to people running against Cory Bush in her primary. And it seems that AIPAC and Democratic majority for Israel are out there being like a really important disciplining mechanism for the Democratic Party establishment.
Yes. They really constrained, like, I think that they checked the trajectory of the Squad. Went from 4 in 2018, 6 in 2020. And then you had a decent number of potential members who lost in 2022 because of AIPAC coming in. Then you had others who really clipped their own wings to fly underneath the radar of AIPAC and DMFI. The other kind of major disciplining force would be No Labels, the one that's now out trying to get Joe Manchin or Mitt Romney or somebody to run as a third party. But they spent pretty heavily in some select primaries with the goal of kind of striking fear in people that, like, if you are too close to the Squad, we're gonna come in and we're gonna spend heavily for whoever your opponent is. And No Labels is all the same, like private equity, hedge funds, football team owners.
So how does No Labels then? I mean, but does No Labels have the same kind of narrative as? How can I put this? It doesn't seem to have the same kind of resonance, at least amongst certain sections of the political elite, as AIPAC has, because obviously AIPAC and other pro-Israel groups can use this very incendiary claim of anti-Semitism.
Mm.
Whereas, what's No Labels going to say? It's like, well, actually cutting your Social Security is good.
Although only so far. So the only ads that I've seen so far where AIPAC has actually talked about Israel-Palestine is recently against Cori Bush in this cycle. In all their other ads, they don't really they don't say they're anti-Semitic. They don't say that they're not supportive of Israel. They just poll whatever they think is going to work in that district, and then they run on that. Like with Nina Turner, it was saying that like voting for Biden was like eating half a bowl of shit or whatever, like whatever her quote was, and they just hammer that. Like with Donna Edwards, they said she was bad at constituent service.
And then Summer Lee, they really went for Summer Lee.
Yeah, that she wasn't a good enough Democrat.
Yeah.
Right. That never said a word about Israel-Palestine. She wasn't a good enough Democrat. And then after she wins the primary, AIPAC spent money trying to support the Republican in that race. I mean, it was cynical to begin with because they had supported more than 100 Republicans that year. So the idea that AIPAC is deeply concerned about, the bona fides of her democraticness was hilarious to begin with. But the fact that even in that race they came in and then tried to support the Republican was just too much. So
it seems as though part of their brand, though, part of what makes them relevant is this Ken Rove type evil genius mystique.
Yes, and also I think they can raise more money. They have a very deep network over the decades of building it. Like they've done an incredible amount of organizing, and they have a story to tell. Whereas when it comes to just straight up class discipline aimed at Bernie or the squad, like corporate America and the super rich are not quite there. They're like, you'll get some of them, and that's who funds No Labels, but that's, you're talking 20 or 30 million or so a cycle, which is a huge amount of money, but it's not like what AIPAC can put into the field. And because the corporate America is spending hundreds of millions of dollars across the spectrum to just buy everybody. And so they're not really convinced that like Bernie Sanders is like the biggest threat to them, or that AOC is the biggest threat to them. Like, yeah, she's annoying and like she wants higher minimum wage and higher taxes, but like we're buying out both parties. And they don't necessarily think that if they beat and also waging that kind of scorched earth campaign against them could like backfire in some ways. So like
it's breakage. You're going to get a few socialists now and then, put them in the playpen, get them the coloring book.
We can deal with this. Yeah.
Whereas AIPAC probably
no.
Its effectiveness then is based that it has a very specific mission, which is to maintain the bipartisan support for the for Israel, and that it has its deep networks, but it has like a focus,
right?
A kind of ideological focus, which means that they are willing in a way that other elements of corporate America aren't to do full scorched earth.
And they have more at stake because of the gap between like we were talking about earlier, the gap between the reality on the ground in Israel-Palestine and the understanding of what's going on there here in the United States, that they can only maintain their position through complete suppression, which is why just a handful of people speaking out become such a threat. So like, I don't know if you've noticed, like just the last couple of days, a bunch of these centrist kind of pundits have been recoiling at the communications minister of Israel and also the ambassador to Britain, just saying out loud, there will be no Palestinian state. Like folks like us who cover this issue have known that that's been the position of the revisionist movement for decades. That Netanyahu ran on that in the 90s, like that's their thing. He says it out loud, but to have it so dominant in the American discourse has these centrist Democrats being like, "Whoa, you're not for a two-state solution? That's insane. We're not for that." And so that's the breakage that AIPAC can't afford. AIPAC can't afford to have that kind of breakthrough.
So AIPAC is in effect kind of been undermined. I mean, Cooper and I were discussing it when you were away. It seems that the diplomatic and political cadre of Israel is just no longer able to speak the language that makes Western liberals comfortable, and that's putting these people in a difficult position. They end up like behaving like Ted Cruz because they're confronted with a reality that is so different from what they're saying. I mean, it's really striking. You hear Americans say the Israelis are not doing X. How could you think this? And the Israelis are saying, no, we're doing X.
We're totally doing X.
We're totally doing X, and we're right to be doing X. And if you don't,
would you like to see some pictures of us doing X?
Yeah, and if you don't like us doing X, you're an anti-Semite, right? But it seems definitely that, like, how's AIPAC relating to this kind of change in the cadre of the Israeli establishment, which seems to be kind of pulling the rug out from under them?
They're moving to the right, and they're getting tighter and tighter with the Republican Party, and I think they're kind of bracing for a split, which they see eventually coming, while at the same time trying to maintain the relations that they have with the Democratic Party. That's also why they spun out Democratic Majority for Israel, because that was seen as like a stopgap solution to this Democratic branding problem that they were having. Let's just put Democrat in the name of the organization.
Well, what Israel has succeeded at doing in Europe is moving from a orientation with center-left parties to being closely affiliated with national conservatism. I think that's from the Israeli perspective, not necessarily AIPAC perspective, but from the Israeli perspective, that's always plan B. That's a fallback position. If you lose the respectable people, will always have the chuds to fall back on. Do you think that they may be overestimating the amount of room there is to pivot right on a pro-Israel platform in the U.S.?
They might be, because our chuds are interesting people.
There's some chuds who do not like Jewish people.
There's a lot of chuds.
And what's actually been quite
right, and they keep linking together anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and so at some point, that argument's going to land in the ears of all these anti-Semitic chuds who are going to be like,
okay. You're going to bring them over to anti-Zionism.
I mean, it was quite striking. Norman Finkelstein did an interview with Candace Owens, which I highly recommend that people watch, because it was, it was just interesting watching, watching Candace Owens respond to Norman Finkelstein's point. His like Giga Chad alpha energy was totally winning her over, and also the response of many people who say, "Good job for not selling out to Dennis Prager and Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire." We and I want to get to this with you, but we might talk about a split amongst the Democratic Party, amongst the progressive left more generally over Israel, but also on the right there seems to be kind of discontent. I can't remember who it was, but some congressman was like, "American patriotism out, Zionism in." Like there seems to be some discontent on the right about like, whoa, why are we all like rah for Israel?
Right, you have to be careful what you tell people, because they might believe it. Like when Trump said America first, like a decent number of his people were like, "Cool, I like that idea," and now they're being told that, and then they were told it was cool to be against Ukraine intervention, and now they're being told that was okay, but now you have to support Israel, and and it's like it's clashing for a lot of them. And I think that like Tom Cotton today was getting a decent amount of right wing pushback. I don't know if you saw this bizarre interview
with the
hearing
judge.
at this hearing. Yeah, there's this Muslim judge, and Tom Cotton asks the most bizarre question I've probably ever seen put forward at a confirmation hearing for like a low level judge. It's like, do you believe that Jewish people in Israel are colonial settlers? And the would-be judge is like, I don't know, man. Like, this is not my issue. With the conflict, it's terrible. Like, I'm not an expert on this. And he, how dare you? But a lot of the right is like, what are you doing? What does that have to do with anything? Like, what in what possible world could this be a question that you would ask of a judge?
Like, you're supposed to just harass them for being Muslim.
Harass them for being Muslim.
Do you believe in Sharia law?
There you go. There you go. Will you be guided by Sharia law?
Will you be guided by Sirat al-Mustaqim?
We know you believe in Sharia law, but will you put your personal beliefs aside?
No, if you're going to ask the question, you have to deliberately mispronounce Sharia, like Sharia.
Sharia law.
Sharon's law. But it does just seem just this time around with this this violence that's taking place in Israel-Palestine, there's a lot more dissent regarding this, both on the right and the left. And, it feels like, people are just not buying this. I mean, do you think this could cost Biden the election? Where does AIPAC go after this? How does this affect our politics? Is this going to just be, do you think, this is, as the meme goes, this is the latest thing that people are going crazy about. It was trans people last, month. This month it's Israel-Palestine, and everything's just in a culture war grish. And, this is actually not going to have any effect. But do you think we're actually seeing the breakdown of the bipartisan consensus on Israel anytime soon? Because I don't see any signs that the bipartisan consensus is going to break down. It just seems that more and more people are like, I don't think this is a good policy, but that has no effect on our political establishment. I mean, look at Britain. In Britain, they're all falling over themselves to, support Israel in this, despite the fact that despite that even their own, like in a predominantly Muslim district, even their own sense of preservation. As a Labour MP in a predominantly Muslim district, they kind of feel the need to rally behind Israel lest they get Jeremy Corbyn.
It's easier to imagine actually the state failing than the policy changing.
It kind of is, yeah, I think, because you also have just the establishment with their love of and their real connection to kind of the Sunni Muslim countries there, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and their ally Israel. Like that is, as we become increasingly less popular around the global South, you've got China making inroads in like every Central and South American country. Just pathetic, like outcome of our colonial 200 years of like Monroe Doctrine, and we can't even control our own hemisphere. Like it doesn't even work on its own terms. So the more that you see that, the more I think the establishment will just go to whatever lengths it needs to maintain those relationships, as long as the fossil fuel economy is central to the global empire.
Well, it's a pretty glum prediction. I mean, like the way that I'm looking at this, it seems that even if the policy won't change, there is going to be serious fallout from this. I mean, we're seeing it in university campuses. I mean, there's this hysteria about the wave of anti-Semitism across universities. I'm very suspect about some of the statistics that are coming out about that, because, they're talking about a couple of elite universities or Research One universities. If you're in the middle of Missouri, like I am, all my students are working 10 jobs and they don't have time to engage in protests, right? But there is a kind of I'm very concerned about how this will affect free speech and how this will feed into this whole meta discourse of misinformation, because this is kind of the big thing that's going on, is this in response to, and there is real misinformation out there. I'm not dismissing the idea that there's misinformation out there, but this is feeding in to a narrative, especially amongst a certain type of Democrat, that the dumb masses are getting manipulated. And this is just another example of these dumb, they were manipulated by Russian interference, blah, blah, blah. Then they were manipulated by Donald Trump, and now it's Israel-Palestine misinformation. Do you think this will have an effect on, people's constitutional rights for free speech?
It's certainly headed in that direction. We love our moral panics here in the United States, and we're at the height of one. So sometimes they leave behind marks, and sometimes they just wash right over us, and everybody pretends like none of it happened. So we'll see what comes out of that. I gotta run. But can I make a request of your audience?
Please make a request.
I mean, obviously, if you guys want to buy the book or check it out of the library or whatever, you should
check it out of a library. And if the library doesn't have it, ask them to get it for you.
And you can even get the audio book out of the library.
Did you read it?
I did read it. Yeah.
You didn't get AI Ryan Grimm to read it?
I should have. Like we had to do some pickups for mistakes. And I'm like, wait, why do you need me for this? You can't you don't have AI yet.
The things I've made people say using my.
You should have gotten the AI Werner Herzog to read your book.
Yeah, there you go.
That's not the request. The request is go to either Goodreads or Amazon and give it a good review. That would help.
Yeah, do that. I think this is like a first draft of history, as they say. Yeah. This will be in 30 years' time when people are writing writing their books on the rise and the fall of the Squad. The Ryan Grimm's trilogy on
you'll need this one, yeah.
The strange death of progressive politics in America, if there are still, paper and televisions exist. We're not eating each other alive.
So you can even lie about reading it. Go and just say great book, 5 stars.
Great book, great stuff. So yeah, do support Ryan Grimm's work. He does important work. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
And I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the book, because I did enjoy the first one. I like the detail. Very rarely do you get good detailed accounts.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I'll see you guys soon.
You take care, Ryan. Bye. Ooh, and there goes, for the grace of God, our dear friend, Ryan Grimm. So, Kuba, what do you think? Dennis Prager gave us oh no, it's not Pennis Graver. It's Pennis Graver. I was excited. I was like, Dennis Graver.
I don't think he realizes that you can pay in single-digit dollars.
No.
Dennis Prager strikes me as the kind of guy who assumes everything costs $50.
You think so? I don't know, man. I don't know if Dennis Prager lives large on the hog.
I'm not saying that he lives high on the hog. I'm saying that he believes that everything costs $50 because he's out of touch with the actual cost of things.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Well, things are expensive. Those eggs, those milks, those waters. Well, it's been a fun evening. Before we leave, Kuba, what video games are you playing right now?
I have to support Team Poland, so I've been playing the Cyberpunk 2077. It's
patriotic for you to play that game, so fair enough.
Exactly. It's actually part of my political economic policy requires me to purchase it, but I've just been fortunate that lately the quality of exports has improved. I'll plug another one. There's one called The Invincible, which is very good, but what I'd really recommend is Observer, which is even more Polish than Cyberpunk. It's set in Krakow, but a dystopian cyberpunk Krakow,
Oh,
right? The
that's
future we all assumed we would have.
well.
Um,
I just saw they had a new video game about the Czech Legion, an
oh,
RPG
yeah, I heard about that.
based on the
Olympus
Czech.
Train or something.
Yeah, like the Last Train or something. Yeah, that looks kind of interesting. I'm of course playing Rogue Trader, Warhammer 40,000, executing people left, right, and center. I executed all my party and was like, oh wait, I've actually killed everybody. Big mistake, Jane. Played a bit of Victoria, but I've been busy working. You know, Kuba and I have been extremely busy over the last couple of months. So we have missed the TIR family. Uh, Hopefully, at some point, we'll be back. I mean, honestly, I'll tell you the truth. When this whole Israel-Palestine stuff started up, I was like, I just can't take this stuff anymore. This is too grim, too just depressing to talk about and do podcasts about. But I guess I'm back for this special episode, and so is Cuba. So before we leave Cuba, would you like to say the magic words? Oh, we do have one request before we leave, which is people asked to see the Calhounist-Leninist flag again. So here you go. That's our Calhounist-Leninist flag right there, ready for everybody. And yeah, it's been really nice being back on TIR. Cuba,
The White People's Republic of Alabama.
the White Workers Republic of Alabama. And yeah, it's been great, guys. And Cuba,
We are
wait for it.
out.
Wait, do it yet because
Oh.
I have to find the thing. We are out.
Out.